It's time for AHA Video 2, and I still don't like doing videos. I sound better, but I want to thank everyone for their good wishes and get well wishes last week. I won't actually get well until allergy season is over, so that's July, at least here in Arkansas. This week was kind of interesting, and I really felt an outsider since I'm not a parent, but I'm an educator of this age group. So I look at things a little differently. I'm not nearly as worried about protecting them as many parents would be. My big aha moment in the chapters we read for OSSET wasn't about OSSET. I kept reading everything and thinking, yeah, I heard this when I was a kid. Yeah, I heard this when I was a kid. Because when I was a child, I remember Pong coming in and video games became something. And I heard about, violence in video games and violence in films and violence on TV. And I'm a pop and pulp culture fan, so I've read some comic book histories, and in the 50s it was comic books and violence and pulp magazines and violence. So when I'm reading OSSET, there's a lot of times I'm reading it going, this isn't new. This isn't unique to this generation. That this is something that's been dealt with a lot. And I'm wondering if the problems aren't that different, but they are exacerbated by the technology and how easy it makes things to access. And I'll take porn as an example, because it came up at work today. Don't ask. Well, actually, we were talking about this kind of situation because we, as an instructor, we always complain about our students. And this came up, and we were talking about how they're not new problems, but they're easier to access. And my first field of study is English, and I was an 18th centuryist. And there was porn back then. There was porn in the 19th century, in the 20th century. But it was a lot harder to get than click, here's Netflix, or click, here's a video on a website, or click, I can subscribe to such and such and no one will know. And I think access may be what exacerbates parental problems more than anything. And in that case, maybe the kids have the leg up, but I often wonder about that. Anita, I think it was, posted about her kids and instant gratification, or her students, I should say, and how if they get impatient, they'll look it up. And I wrote a comment, and my comment was, my kids that I teach are 16, 17, 18, and adults, because it is a community college, and I teach in a computer lab. All you have to do to look anything up is hit it and pull up Google and search, or use their phone. And I'll ask a simple question. And they won't even look up Google. They just look at me like, oh, you must have the answer. You asked it. Which is worrisome because I find a lot of this generation is more naive about authority in that sense. Either they don't think anything's an authority or they think everything's an authority. I'm not quite sure which it is. The election showed us it's a problem. And since I start teaching next week, and I'm doing a composition section on news literacy, I've got to figure out some of that out quickly. But that was part of my aha moment, was that it's access. And I don't know how you can really control that. Most kids know how to get around the parental controls before their parents can figure out how to set them. And one of the things I got out of one of the aha moments I had watching the Frontline video growing up online, there were a couple there, was when Dana Boyd made some kind of comment about were the children on the internet victims or participants? Or she said they had to stop being victims and start being participants, or their parents had to view them that way. It was an interesting comment because I think it's far too easy for parents certainly to want to see and protect their children and not make them responsible for things they instigate. And not making them agents in their online world. Which made me think of an essay I've taught by a guy named William Zisner called On Failure, which argues that it's only through failure we learn, and that we have to let kids fail. That one mother who said one bad judgment can affect their life. Yeah, but it's not necessarily going to have bad consequences if they learn from it. And I have to think part of this worry for these kids from people my age, because most of these millennials and Generation Z are people who were in my generation or their parents. Our reaction to being latchkey kids and having too much responsibility, so that we've taken it all away from our children. And I think we've got to find a happy medium. But then again, I have no children, so it's easy for me to say and not easy for me to do, or to know how to do. The other aha moment I had watching the Frontline documentary was exactly how far technology had come. It's kind of, as you go and progress through it year by year, you don't quite notice it. I mean, I was teaching in 2008. I was teaching at this institution. My students, I remember Razor flip phones and my students having them and comparing things. And the change didn't really dawn on me until I was watching it, of how much that smartphone has changed the technology our students see and use, or your children see and use. It's a lot. The world was a lot different on a flip phone than an iPhone or an Android or a Samsung that's as big as your head. It made me realize how easy, much more easy. Never mind. I'm still a little stoned on cold medicine. I won't worry about my grammar. But it made me realize how much easier it is for kids to conduct an entirely private life that their parents have no access to with a cell phone. In the video, it showed the mother who put the computer in the main room and would hover over it and keep an eye on it. You can't do that with a cell phone. You can try, but unless you make your kid leave your cell phone in a place that's publicly visible overnight or whenever it's not in use, you don't know what they're doing. And that's kind of where I can see it's a scary thing. I was also, reminded of how old I am when they were talking about and showing the AOL Instant Messenger. And I could remember using it. And that's one of the things also. A lot of people my age may not have grown up using technology, but we've grown up with it. So we do have ways we can relate. And certainly we have been affected too. We are just as bad as children are when it comes to instant gratification. My husband and I are watching TV and we start having a little spat about who's starting what. One of us will grab a cell phone and look the answer up. That's not any different from what our kids are doing. Or if we see something that interests us or think of it, we're just as prone to do what they do for that instant gratification. It's also, I was laughing as I wrote my post we talk about how proficient the young generation is with technology, and we act as if we're not, but I'm sitting there writing my post on my laptop with my textbook open on my Kindle while my Surface charges and my other Droid tablet has the articles I'm reading and reviewing to go with things, with my cell phone also charging somewhere else. We are just as technologically tagged in, if not more, than the students are, or than the children are. We don't have that excuse. We shouldn't be able to say, oh, I don't know how to use technology, because we use it. We may have been the early adopters, and we may still have a different set of values and how we approach it. But we shouldn't be sitting there going, oh, my kid knows technology so much better than I do, because I don't know that it's true. I know how to use a computer better than my students. My students do not literally know how to save a file. They do not know how to do computer research other than to go to Google and type stuff in. Now, they may be pretty smart about knowing the differences in what not to trust so much. Some of them, not all of them. But by far and away, I think we give them too much credit. Last semester I taught my composition courses around social media, and I had them read a bunch of articles. One was by Sherry Turkle, who is very much a critic of social media. One was, I forgot the name of the other guy. He wrote an article for The Atlantic called The Flight from Conversation. And I don't remember his name at the moment. I'm drawing a blank. And I had my students respond and write about these things. And I will say this. They are very aware of the negative side of their technology. Excuse me. I'm trying not to cough. They're very, very aware of their negative side. They pulled up as problems cyberbullying, which I think Shelby mentioned this week, or someone mentioned this week. I'm bad. It's hard for me to put names and posts together, unlike names and faces. But they were very aware of cyberbullying. Now, whether they were victims or perpetrators, I don't know, but it was certainly a problem. They were very aware of catfishing. They were very aware of identity theft. They were very aware of sexual predation, but it was funny to watch the parents all freaking out about that side of things, when right now it's cyberbullying and identity theft that are much more prevalent and worrisome than luring the teenager off. They are very aware of that stuff. Now, how well they can cope with it depends, of course, on the child. But I think we have to let them fail and let them make bad judgments to some extent when it comes to social media. Nothing dangerous, perhaps. But certainly, it is only through failure that we learn. It's through failure that we go forward. And that's one of the things that I know parents have a hard time with, and they should. But it's a necessity. A teachable moment, as the cliche is really a moment of failure. And everybody has to have them. That's how our identities do develop. Yes, it's from social pressures. Yes, the internet has a role. Yes, parents have a role. Yes, schools and peers have roles as we grow older and go through all the various Freudian or Lacanian or whoever out there comes up, Piaget, stages that they come up with. Those stages still have to involve failure. And kids have to have, and one of the things that struck me about watching the documentary was the kids were aware of this. They were participants. They did stuff. They knew they were doing stuff. They were much more aware, I think, than their parents of what they were doing, and much more aware of what they were doing than their parents gave them credit for. And we have to allow that. That has to be an allowed situation, especially as they mature. And I look at it, of course, a little differently since I teach adults. They're young adults, but they are adults. And it's less about protecting them and more about forcing them to mature. And I think the internet has made them less mature. But I'm not sure it's the internet's fault or their parents' fault. And I don't know if fault is the right word. Responsibility might be a better word. But certainly, one of the things I see with my students who are in both Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen X is that responsibility and work ethic problem. They are very quick to give up and not persevere. And that's the reverse side of that instant gratification. Oh, I can't write this paper, so I'll fail it instead of trying. That sort of thing. And I don't know a fix for that. If I could think of a fix for that, I could write $1 million book and not need a second master's. But anyway, so I had some aha moments this week, but I don't think they would be anything like anybody else's because A, I'm childless, and B, I look at most everything as an educator. And I don't see these as children anymore because when I see them, they're adults. The youngest student I've taught is 16, and he's at that cusp of that, and the oldest student I've taught in last year was older than me. They all had to use the technology, and they all did. They all had. But I will say this, when it came to social media, that's where the kids were fast. They weren't quick with a computer. They were quick with a phone, and they were quick with a Snapchat, and they were quick with the impromptu video. They weren't good with video assignments. Maybe that's why I don't like video assignments. Anyway, that was my series of aha moments and reflections for this week. Keeping this vlog is a little weird, but it is what it is. Have a good weekend. Enjoy Martin Luther King Day. Pray for me as I go back to classes on Tuesday. Bye-bye.